Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to demonstrate how we are going to work, or rather how we are going to authenticate a user from SQL Server with Node.js and promises. For example, if we have a users table in a database and we want to write a function that can accept a username and a password and can authenticate the same from a SQL Server or from any another database within Node.js and promises. So this video is meant for you. This is in a continuation of different part series which I've already published on my channel. This is the part 3 video, and the first two parts were more on the Knex and SQL Server. So stay tuned, and I'm going to demonstrate how we are going to work for the authentication of a user within SQL Server and with the help of Node.js and promises. So in order to make this code work, that is when we are going to authenticate a user from SQL Server with the help of Node.js and promises, we are assuming that we must have some kind of a table. I already have a table called as users, and if you see in this table, there are primarily 3 columns. One is ID, username, and password. Though it is not a good practice to store password in plain text in your databases, you must use some kind of a hashing mechanism so that the passwords are secured in the form of a hashed one rather than the plain text. But this is only for the demonstration purpose. We can have different column names or other things also, but right now we just have an ID, which is a kind of a automated incremented ID and acting as a primary key. The username is Rohit, and then password is 123 or whatever the passwords we want to keep it. So in order to make sure that when the user passes on the right information, user would be passing on that information either from a front end, might be written in React or Angular or an ASP.NET server-side scripting language, but then at the back end, whether it is Node.js or whatever it is, which is going to actually run that logic, connect with the SQL Server, and then finally you can actually receive whether the user was rightly authenticated or not. And this would be done only if the user has supplied the right credentials or not. We'll be using the Knex Library to connect to the SQL Server, which I've already shown in my previous videos. If you have not gone through, kindly go through those videos which are already there on my YouTube channel. And this is the one which is our third part series in continuation of Node.js, Knex, SQL Server, and now we'll also be using promises in this. So let's get started and write some code. The first thing which we'll be using is to kind of require the Knex library and connect onto that. So we'll be just using that. Let me just kind of increase the font size or zoom in so it's better in terms of readability. So we'll say Knex is equal to require, and we are going to require the Knex library, and then yes, we are going to pass on different configuration options within this. So the client is MS SQL, and then we have the connection property or the connection key, which needs different attributes, other keys and settings. So this first one is server, which is localhost, and then you need a user, which is SA in my case. Password is 123. This I mentioned in my previous video also, like all those settings, server, user, or passwords. This is not a good practice to directly hardcode these values in the file itself. Rather, they would be coming from environment or configuration files, which is the best practice that you should follow. But this is just for a small demonstration, so that's why I'm taking it directly. And then finally, which database we want to connect. And yes, the database name is lovely out here. Okay, so this small piece of snippet of code exactly requires the Knex library and kind of connect to your SQL Server with some connection information. And now what we are going to do is we are going to create a function called as Authenticate User. You can name it anything, and it would be passing on receiving on 2 parameters. One is the username and one is the password. and this the user would pass on. So whether you are receiving it from a front end or anywhere, but this is what you need to pass on. And then we use the Knex library. So we'll say Knex dot select, and then we'll say ID from users. That's the table where the username column must be equal to the value that was supplied with the by the username or the person who has actually fill in the value, and that's received by us. And we also use an and where condition, because we want that the username should be this and then the password should be technically the password one. So what we do over here is, so we pass on the password that's also supplied over here. So that's one thing. And then because it returns a promise, so we just use a promise out here and get it in the form of a users. And now if the username and password combination was perfectly fine, so what we are going to do is this promise is going to return some kind of a data because the user was found out from the database. So what you can do is, if users dot length greater than 0, because it returns it in the form of an array, it means then I'm going to return a promise dot resolve. So it means my everything is fine, I'm just going to resolve the promise and return the users of 0. And then because I'm selecting a ID column within my Knex query, so I'll be just returning the ID property of that particular object. And else if it was not there, let's say the length was not greater than 0, so it means either the username password didn't match or that particular user didn't exist. So we just want to return a promise dot I'm also going to return rather resolve it, but I'm going to resolve it with the false value, so that I don't want to reject it, I still want to resolve it. But then it means if the false value is there within the resolve, so it means the username password didn't match or the username didn't exist. And we do want to close the connection so that there is no issue around that. And then yep, this is what it goes into the finally connection. And then finally we just use Knex dot destroy, so that the connection is destroyed and memory is freed up. So this is what the whole promise does. And it kind of resolves everything for us. And then if the user is found, it would return user's ID, which is technically being returned in the select query. And if the let's say if the users was not found, so we still resolve the promise, but we return a false value. And now finally we need to call this function so that we can validate. So what we'll do is, I'll just simply say const result is equal to authenticate user, and let's say I pass on a right username and password, which is Rohit is the username, 123 is the password. And because it returns me a result, so I can just simply say user, if it returns me out, that's a then. And if it returns me something, so if not user means if it returns me a false value, because we did resolve the promise with a false value. So what we can say is console.log sorry, either the username or password does not match. So some message out here. And else if it didn't return a false value, so we are going to say console.log you have successfully logged in. So that kind of makes sense. And then finally yep, So our code looks fine. So here we are calling that authenticate user. We passed two parameters, the username and the password, and then the promise is being returned out based upon whatever the promise is. Either it's a false value or the object. So if it is there, so then accordingly you display the message. Or right now we are just displaying a console.log, but in an actual application you would just redirect the user if the user credentials were okay to kind of an index page or a home page, or you would just pop up a dialog box like, hey, the credentials didn't match. So let's try running this and see if it works. So this is the one which is we are passing on the right username and password, and if we see it in the database, we have a username Rohit and password is equal to 123. So if we try to run this, we'll say node authenticate user.js and we run that. It is giving us there is okay, so probably I've saved this file somewhere else, or we are just not giving the right file name. Authenticate user, no, the file name looks fine, so let's check it out. Let's authenticate. So if we check that out and see if the username this particular is there, authenticate, no, it is not here. So let's save that again. So we'll save it as and put it into the right folder. So we'll just go into the temp where I am, Nodejs, and we'll put it over here, authenticate user. So save it. Okay, and then yeah, let's try running it. Sorry, let's save that. Okay, so if I run the dir again, and now if we see authenticate user.js is there. Okay, so now we can run it, node authenticate user.js. So yes, it does run it, and it says you have successfully logged in. Why? Because we provided the right username and password. So now what we'll try to do is we'll try to supply our wrong password, let's say 45, which is not the password as you could see in my database, which is 123. And now if we run this, so we'll just try to run the file again, and yes, it says sorry, either the username or password does not match. So yep, this kind of a code uses Node.js, it uses Knex, it uses SQL Server as the database, it uses promises to exactly write that code. But in case you are working with MongoDB or Postgres or SQLite, you can still use the similar code. It's fundamentally the code would remain same, the logic would remain same, but then it's just like the connection strings or other things would be different. I hope you guys are going to kind of get benefit from this video, and you're going to love this video, because this is one of the most important aspect of any app development, where the user is going to supply a username, password, and then you're going to authenticate that user or the credentials from some kind of a database. Thank you guys. I'll be back with some another video, probably with the Knex or some another concept which I feel is better. Please comment on this video or whatever you want that I should create a video on that. Have a good one and a good night, a good day, wherever, to all the people who are watching my videos. Thank you.